Tempelhof Airport, Berlin, July 1948. General Sir Brian Robertson, British military governor of Germany, stood on the tarmac watching another American C-54 Skymaster touchdown. The four-engine transport taxied to its unloading point, ground crews already moving toward it with trucks and forklifts. Before the propellers stopped spinning, cargo doors were opening. 3 minutes later, the plane was unloaded. 6 minutes after that, it was airborne again. Robertson checked his watch. Another C-54 was already on final approach. "How many today?" he asked his aide. 147 American aircraft so far, sir. It's only 1,400 hours. Robertson had been a soldier for 30 years. He'd served in both world wars, commanded divisions, understood military logistics at a scale most men couldn't imagine. But this was something different. The Americans weren't supplying an army. They were supplying an entire city by air. The Berlin blockade had begun on June 24, 1948. Soviet forces had closed all road, rail, and canal access to West Berlin, cutting off 2.5 million people from food, fuel, and supplies. Stalin's calculation was simple. The Western Allies couldn't supply a city by air. They would be forced to either abandon Berlin or negotiate from weakness. The British had immediately begun their own airlift operations. RAF Dakotas and Yorks were flying supplies from bases in Western Germany. But British calculations showed the numbers clearly. Berlin needed 4,500 tons of supplies per day to survive. Food, coal, medical supplies, raw materials for factories. The RAF could manage perhaps 400 tons per day, maybe 750 if they pushed everything to the limit. The Americans had arrived and shattered the arithmetic. Major General William Tunner took command of American airlift operations on July 28th. He'd run the Hump airlift over the Himalayas during the war, moving supplies from India to China over some of the most dangerous terrain on Earth. He understood air logistics better than almost anyone alive. His first act was to tour Tempelhof with his British counterparts. General Tunner, a British logistics officer, explained, "We've calculated that even with maximum effort, we can perhaps deliver 1,000 tons per day total between British and American aircraft. Berlin needs 4,500. The mathematics simply don't work." Tunner looked at the airfield, at the single runway, at the limited parking apron. Then he looked at his watch. "How many tons do you currently deliver per aircraft per day?" "Our Dakotas can carry about 3 tons. They make perhaps 2 round trips daily, sometimes 3, so roughly 6 to 9 tons per aircraft per day." Tunner nodded slowly. "We're going to deliver 4,500 tons per day, more if needed." The British officer was too polite to say it was impossible, but his expression said it clearly enough. Within 2 weeks, British observers began to understand what American operational planning actually meant. Air Commodore J.W.F. coordinating with the Americans watched the flight schedule for August 10th take shape. C-54 Skymasters were landing at Tempelhof every 8 minutes. Not approximately every 8 minutes. Exactly every 8 minutes. Each aircraft carried 10 tons of cargo. Each aircraft spent exactly 30 minutes on the ground, landing, unloading, and takeoff. Then it returned to its base in Western Germany, loaded 10 more tons, and flew back. The Americans had turned airlift into an assembly line in the sky. "They're treating it like a factory," Mera said to a colleague. "Like a production line. Aircraft are just the product moving through the system." By mid-August, American aircraft were delivering 1,500 tons per day to Berlin. The British were contributing another 750 tons, still short of the 4,500-ton requirement, but far beyond what anyone had thought possible in June. Then the Americans scaled up. Wing Commander Noel Hyde, working as a liaison with the American operation, received a briefing in late August about planned expansion. "We're bringing in another 75 C-54s, the American operations officer explained. Plus, we're extending the runways at Tegel to handle the increased traffic. Current projection is 3,500 tons per day from American aircraft alone by October." Hyde did the mental arithmetic. 3,500 tons per day meant 350 aircraft flights daily at 10 tons per load. That was 1 aircraft every 4 minutes, 24 hours a day. "That's assuming perfect conditions," he said carefully. "No weather delays, no mechanical issues, no." "We're planning for 4,500 tons per day by November," the American interrupted. The 3500 is the baseline. We're building in capacity for weather, maintenance, everything. Hyde had spent the war coordinating bomber operations over Germany. He understood the complexity of air operations, the variables, the unpredictable factors that made precise planning impossible. The Americans were doing it anyway. By September, British pilots flying into Berlin were experiencing something that felt impossible. The air corridors from Western Germany to Berlin were filled with aircraft stacked at different altitudes. American C-54s were flying in 3-minute intervals during peak hours. Squadron leader Tony Payne, piloting an RAF York into Gatow Airport, heard the American air traffic controller managing the traffic. Air Force 823, descend to 2,000 feet, maintain 160 knots, you are number 7 for landing. Air Force 826, maintain 3,000 feet, maintain 180 knots, you are number 8. Air Force 829, you are cleared to Tempelhof, contact approach on 119.1. Payne counted the aircraft he could see, 12 American C-54s in visual range, all in perfect formation, all maintaining exact intervals. It's like a bloody conveyor belt, his co-pilot muttered. But the real shock came when British officers visited American bases in Western Germany. Rhine-Main Air Base, October 1948. Air Vice Marshal T.M. Williams toured the American facility. What he saw defied his understanding of air operations. C-54s were landing every 6 minutes. Each aircraft taxied to a loading point where American ground crews swarmed it. Forklifts moved palletized cargo into the hold. Every movement was choreographed, every second planned. The operations officer, a young American major, walked Williams through the process. We've standardized everything. Every cargo load is pre-palletized to exact specifications. Every pallet is the same dimensions, same weight distribution. Ground crews know exactly where each pallet goes in the hold. No improvisation, no variation. And if you need to carry something that doesn't fit the pallet specifications, we make it fit. We repackage it, break it down, rebuild it. The system is designed for speed and reliability. We don't adapt the system to the cargo. We adapt the cargo to the system. Williams watched a C-54 land, unload, reload, and take off in 28 minutes. The moment it cleared the runway, another was landing. How many aircraft do you have? Williams asked. At this base, 72 C-54s assigned. We're averaging 480 tons per day from Rhine-Main alone. Williams knew the RAF had about 40 transport aircraft assigned to the entire airlift. The Americans had 72 at a single base and were operating 5 bases. By October, the numbers became clear. American aircraft were delivering 3,000 tons per day to Berlin. British aircraft contributed another 1,000 tons. Total, 4,000 tons. Still short of the 4,500-ton requirement, but enough to keep Berlin alive as autumn arrived. The Americans weren't done scaling up. In November, British commanders received projections for winter operations. Berlin would need more coal as temperatures dropped, more food, more heating supplies. Requirements would climb to 5,500 tons per day. The American response was simple. They'd deliver it. Air Marshal Sir Arthur Sanders, coordinating with General Tunner, reviewed the winter plan with professional skepticism. General, these numbers assume perfect execution. Weather over Germany in winter is unpredictable. Ice, fog, snow. We'll have days when nothing flies. Tunner nodded. That's why we're planning for 6,000 tons per day capacity. When weather grounds us, we'll have a backlog. When weather clears, we'll make it up. You're planning to have excess capacity, that's... Sanders paused, searching for words. That's not how we approach logistics. I know, Tunner said simply, but we're not planning for what we think we can do. We're planning for what Berlin needs. Then we build the system to deliver it. The difference in philosophy was stark. British planning started with available resources and determined what was possible. American planning started with requirements and built capability to match. On Easter Sunday, April 16, 1949, the Americans demonstrated what their system could do. Operation Easter Parade was designed to show the Soviets and the British the true capacity of the airlift. For 24 hours, every available American aircraft would fly maximum sorties. British observers positioned at Tempelhof and Gatow watched in stunned silence. C-54s landed every 90 seconds. Not every 3 minutes, every 90 seconds. For 24 hours straight, ground crews worked in choreographed precision. Unload, reload, refuel, launch. The moment one aircraft cleared the runway, another touched down. Wing Commander Robert Millward, observing from the Tempelhof control tower, counted landings. After 2 hours, he'd counted 142 American aircraft movements, landings and takeoffs. He stopped counting. The final tally for Operation Easter Parade, Win 398 flights delivering 12,141 tons of cargo in 24 hours. British planners who'd calculated that 4,500 tons per day was mathematically impossible watched the Americans deliver nearly 13,000 tons in a single day. They didn't just exceed expectations, one British logistics officer wrote in his report. They operated in a different reality where the rules we understood simply didn't apply. The Berlin airlift continued until September 1949. By the time it ended, the statistics told a story that British commanders would study for decades. Total tonnage delivered, 2,406 tons. American contribution, 1,573 tons. British contribution, 541,137 tons. The Americans had delivered more than 3 times what the British had managed, despite starting from scratch, despite having to build the infrastructure, despite facing the same weather and the same impossibilities. But the numbers alone didn't capture what British officers had witnessed. Air Chief Marshal Sir James Robb, writing his final assessment of the operation, was characteristically measured in his official report. American success was predicated on systematic application of industrial principles to air operations, supported by material abundance and organizational capacity that exceeded British capabilities. In his private diary, he was more direct. We thought in terms of what was possible with what we had. The Americans thought in terms of what was required and built whatever was necessary to achieve it. Different philosophy, different scale, different outcome. A British pilot who'd flown the entire airlift put it more simply. We were running an airline. They were running a production line. Both worked, but one worked better. The shock, if that's the right word, wasn't that the Americans had succeeded. British commanders knew the Americans had resources, knew they had industrial capacity, knew they were capable of large operations. The shock was watching them apply that capacity with ruthless efficiency to a problem everyone else believed was unsolvable, watching them turn air operations into a factory system, watching them scale up from nothing to 13,000 tons per day in less than a year. The Soviets lifted the blockade on May 12, 1949. They'd calculated that West Berlin couldn't be supplied by air. They'd been correct according to every reasonable assessment of logistics, capacity, and possibility. But the Americans hadn't attempted a reasonable airlift. They'd built an impossible one and made it work through systematic application of industrial principles that treated the impossible as merely an engineering problem requiring sufficient resources. British generals watching American C-54s fill the sky over Berlin in 1948 and 1949 understood something fundamental about the post-war world. The rules had changed, the scale had changed, what was possible had changed, and America had the industrial capacity and organizational will to operate at scales that made the impossible routine. The final flight of the Berlin airlift landed on September 30th, 1949. By then, the operation had become so efficient, so systematized, that it was operating at 7,000 tons per day capacity, more than 50% beyond Berlin's actual requirements. They hadn't just solved the problem, they'd built a system with excess capacity as a margin of safety. That was what British commanders saw when they watched the Berlin airlift. Not just an operation, but a demonstration of what American industrial power looked like when fully applied to a single objective. And they understood that this was the new reality of the Cold War. Problems that seemed impossible by British arithmetic were simply engineering challenges in American calculations.